welcome to this episode of The Martial Truth. Titles. So let's talk about titles. Before we begin, I just want to mention memberships are now available on the channel. They're $2.99 a month. The focus will be on instructional videos for members, for those that actually join the channel and support it. Once we reach a certain level of members, I'll look to do some live workshops and live podcasts. Also, for those that like the podcast, members will get a commercial-free version of the podcast, and they will get the podcast a few days before the commercial one will be available to everybody else. Okay, so members get a commercial-free version of the podcast, and they'll be able to see the podcast a few days before everybody else. All right, so I appreciate if you do that. Support me. It helps with the channel. It'll allow me to do other things, hopefully down the line. So, titles. So when I started martial arts, the only title I ever heard was Sensei. And for this podcast, I'm actually going to have a cheat sheet here because there's so many titles, okay, that I want to try to make sure I don't leave any out. And I'm probably going to get told when I put this up that I did leave some out, okay? So I'm trying to cover a whole bunch of them, and this is mostly being the Japanese realm. That's what I'm looking at here, the Japanese Okinawan system, okay? So the only thing I ever heard the teacher called was Sensei. I never heard any other terms, any other titles. As I was around longer, I heard other titles brought up, not really understanding what those were. We just called the head instructor Sensei. We didn't call him anything else. All right. In my dojo, you'll hear a lot of the black belts get called Sensei. So like in the New York school, which has a lot of black belts, and a lot of senior black belts, there's 7th dans there, right? So you'll hear maybe one of the black belts refer to one of the most senior black belts and call him Sensei. But the black belts normally, they're calling each other by name, okay? The Q grades are always calling a black belt normally by the title of Sensei, right? It just works. They don't call me anything different. Everybody calls me Sensei. Even my feeding crane and Tai Chi students call me Sensei. Couple of reasons for that. One is most of the other people were with me studying karate or kobudo or one of these other arts before they started studying practical method with me. So they became so used to calling me Sensei, and then they were asking, well, do we have to call you Shifu? Do we have to call you Shifu? I said, no, Sensei's fine. So pretty much everybody calls me Sensei, and it works out a lot better when my Tai Chi master's here. He's Shifu, so we all call him Shifu, and my students just call me Sensei. Recently someone got a little annoyed. Well, if you're teaching arts, they shouldn't be called Chinese arts. They shouldn't be calling you Sensei. Okay, let's all get a grip here. That should be the worst thing I've ever been called. All right. So, like I say all the time, if someone is calling someone Sensei, but in their mind they're really thinking asshole, that's probably a problem and not a good thing. All right. So, some people sometimes slip and call me Mike, and some people do call me Mike. I don't get hung up on it. It's my name. Okay. So, it's a respect thing. You want to go by the proper title. It is important. In Okinawa, I only call my teacher Sensei. Japan is the same thing. I only call them Sensei. All right. So let's talk about the word Sensei. So whenever I ask someone, what does the word Sensei mean? They always say teacher. Sensei means person born before another. All right. Someone who came before. That's its literal translation. So it's denoting a certain seniority. So for instance, I studied Japanese bonsai. The trees where you prune the trees and make the small trees, right? The person I studied with was very well known, Phil Tactile. He, an American who studied in Japan, has trees on display at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, very well known. I called him Sensei. That's what I called him. Okay. I had a Japanese professor at New York City Technical College when I went to school. His name was Byron Goto. I called him Sensei. Okay, Japanese, I called him Sensei. So it's in Japan, you'll hear people that are doctors called sensei, teachers called sensei, Go masters, the Japanese game of Go with the white and black stones, you'll hear them called sensei. So it's not unique to just martial arts. It's a cultural term. Okay, so sensei is the most common term we'll hear in a Japanese or Okinawan dojo. Understand its connotation and what it means. And it's a very serious form of respect. I mean, I always felt in martial arts, people calling me sensei made me feel good. It made me feel like they appreciated what I was teaching them and showing them. All right, so that's what sensei means. Sensei is a verbal title. So you, by all means, you refer to someone as sensei verbally. The kids will call me Sensei Mike. Hey, Sensei Mike, can you show me this, right? The adults will sometimes say, excuse me, Sensei Calandra, right? And add my last name, right? So some people, more formal, they put the name first and they'll say, oh, excuse me, Calandra Sensei, okay? In our culture, they're all acceptable. In the Japanese culture, you normally put the name first before you say sensei. Okay? So just some things to keep in mind. All right. Shihan. Shihan. You'll hear this referred to as a master, which is a general translation of what the word means. It means to be a model. To be a model. You'll hear it also referred to as a master instructor. Okay, it's not necessarily a formal thing where you receive a certificate for it, although some arts do issue a certificate for Shihan. In Isshinryu we have what's called an instructor's license. It's not a Shihan certificate. All right, so Master Shimabuku issues an instructor license. You will hear some people call Shihan. Just to give you an idea, I've trained in Isshinryu Karate and Mariyoshi Kobudo on Okinawa. In Japan proper, on the mainland, I've trained in Shindo Musuru Jodo, Sosu Ishido Jiu-Jitsu, Katori Shinto-ryu. All right? I've studied Yagyu Shinkagiru, Musa Shindenryu, okay, Shindo Muninryu, and a bunch of various Japanese arts. I never heard anybody called Shihan in Japan verbally. So I've never heard someone referred to verbally in Japan as Shihan. I've heard two titles verbally in Japan. One is sensei, one is kancho. So kancho means head of the dojo. So there were a couple of my students that were calling me kancho, right? But those were few and far between. I'm the head of the dojo, so there are a lot of sensei, but Calandra Sensei is the head of the dojo. He's the kancho. Okay, and that's fine. Again, those are the two verbal titles that I've heard people refer to in Japan that are acceptable. Okay, sensei and kancho. So if you're head of the dojo and you want to be really formal, you can be called kancho while the rest of the instructors are called sensei. Okay, so kancho is head of a dojo. So we've got sensei, one who came before, Shihan, to be a model, okay, and kancho, which is head of the dojo. All right. Soke. Soke is head of a family. So for instance, Shimabuku Kichiro Sensei, my Isshinryu Karate Sensei, he is the Soke of Isshinryu. His father was the first Soke. He is the second Soke. It's a family martial art created by Tatsuo Shimabuku, passed on to his son. So his son is the second Soke. In Katori Shinto-ryu, I'm not even sure what number Soke we're up to, but I think it might be 17. Okay, could be more than that. It's an unbroken line going back 600 years. He's the head of Katori Shinto-ryu. The present Soke of Katori Shinto-ryu doesn't physically practice the art, but he is the Soke. He's the head of the school, okay? The familial head of the school, all right? In Sosu Ishido, Shitama Manzo is the current Soke of Sosu Ishido. He's the 16th Soke of the art, going back almost 400 years, all right? So in Mariyoshi Kobudo, Yasushi Mariyoshi is the current soke of the art, inherited from his father. So this is what you want to understand by soke. I've never ever heard anybody called soke, ever. All right. It's a title where you understand what the person is. If I'm talking about that person to somebody else, I can say, well, he's the soke of Ishinru. Oh, okay. They understand now. He's the familial head of the art. All right. So, but you don't call someone soke. All right. It's just something I've never heard done in Japan or Okinawa. Kaicho. Kaicho is head of an organization. So in the same token as Shimabuku Kichiro Sensei is the soke of Ishinru, he's the kaicho of the Ishinru Kokusai Karate Do Renmei, more commonly known as the Ishinru World Karate Association. He's the head of that association. He's the kaicho. All right. So if you're the head of an organization, that would be what you are. You're the kaicho. Okay. Another title I've never heard anybody called in Japan or Okinawa. Okay. So let's get to a few of the other ones. But before we go there, let's mention one title in Chinese arts, which is Shifu, right? Shifu means master. What you need to understand is the connotation master in the Chinese culture is kind of similar to it's a revered status, and some cultures use that word because they hold you in very high esteem. Okay, in terms of the term shifu, when it comes to like myself being a disciple of Chen Zhanghua in Chen style Taiji Chuan practical method, it's considered a father-son relationship. So only disciples will call him shifu, all right, and that's a father-son relationship. So that's how deep the relationship should be. So people get hung up, well, it means master. Everyone thinks they're a master. If it's being used properly, that's the translation, but that's not necessarily the connotation of what it actually means. So it's a lot deeper than that. Okay. So I just thought I'd mention that. Okay, let's get to 3 other titles. Let's start with Renshi. Renshi, polished instructor or expert. Okay. So Renshi, Kyoshi, and Hanshi are 3 titles that are independent of your Dan grade. Let me repeat that. They're 3 titles that are independent of your Dan grade. So someone once came to visit my dojo, an Ishinru practitioner, and they said they were Yondan Renshi. And my response was, you have a Renshi certificate? And they turned and looked at the person they were with and then looked back at me and said, there's a certificate for that? And I said, yes. Master Shimabuku issues those certificates if he feels you're deserving of them. Okay. Renshi, Kyoshi, Hanshi. Okay. So, Renshi is normally, can be issued anywhere from normally 4th to 6th Dan. So you heard what I said. So you can be a 4th Dan and not be Renshi. Then you could be a 5th Dan and receive Renshi. You could be a 4th Dan and receive Renshi. You may not receive Renshi to 6th Dan. You may not receive Renshi at all. Now, not all arts issue Renshi, Kyoshi, and Hanshi certificates. Okay? So, you have a separate certificate. I know in Ishinru and certain other arts, a separate certificate. Okay? And then the next one is Kyoshi, which is professor or philosopher. Okay? These are basically saying now you're reaching the higher levels of martial arts, but not just physically, but also in terms of your mind and your understanding. You have a deeper understanding of the art. You're your way of teaching has improved so much. So you've become a very deep thinker in that particular martial art you're doing, and you're now able to bring that deep thinking into your instruction when you bring it and teach other students. Okay. And the last one is Hanshi, which is teacher of teachers or senior expert. Okay. So for myself, I'm Kudan in Isshinryu Karate from Master Kichiro Shimabukuro. And I'm also Hanshi. All right. So I have two separate certificates. I have a Kudan certificate. I have a Hanshi certificate. On my Hanshi certificate, the only thing in English is the upper right-hand corner. He put my name in English, and above it in English, he put Hanshi Go. Okay. So these three titles, I constantly in the United States hear people call someone Renshi. Well, Renshi, could you show me this Renshi? Kiyoshi, Kiyoshi, could you tell me this? Hanshi, could you go over this kata with me? Okay, so what my friends in the United States, and if it's going on in Europe too, and I know it goes on in India, okay, so certain places are doing this. If a Japanese hears you call someone that, they basically think you're foolish. You don't understand the culture. You don't understand these titles. So these titles, again, are not verbal titles. You don't refer to someone as Renshi. You don't refer to someone as Kiyoshi. No one in my dojo ever says to me, Hanshi, could you go over Seisan with me? Hanshi, could you go over this with me? No. First off, if they did, I would stop them right away and say, no, don't ever call me Hanshi. It's Sensei. And if you want to get real formal, you can call me Kansho. But frankly, Sensei is the best. Just call me Sensei. All right? So I constantly hear these three titles being misused. And no matter how often I tell people, they continue to do it. And my thing is I'm not Japanese, I'm not Okinawan, I'm not Chinese, I'm American. I'm never going to be those things. I'm never going to understand those cultures the way someone born and is from those places. All right? But what I'm going to try to do is respect that culture. All right? So the one dojo I trained in Yoyogi, the senior teacher they only called him Kansho. And to give you an idea, and this is kind of funny, when I first went there, I literally had never heard that term. So I asked one of the students that spoke English, I said, why are you guys calling him by his first name? I thought Kansho was his first name. And then they said, oh, no, Kansho is head of the dojo. I said, oh, okay, right? So, which was interesting, right? Because he was 8th Dan, and there were some other 8th Dans in his dojo. So the other 8th Dans, obviously, I would call Sensei, right? So even I, at that point, because I'd never heard that word used before, I didn't understand it. I literally was like, wow, they're calling this guy by his first name. But Kansho, like I said, means head of the dojo, all right? So if in your dojo, you're being called Renshi, Kiyoshi, or Hanshi, take your ego, put it in your pocket. It's very nice that you might be Renshi, you might be Kiyoshi, you might be Hanshi. When I was promoted to that, when I started when I was 15 years old, over 45 years ago, if you ever said to me I would be promoted to 9th Dan and I would be given the grade of Hanshi by the head of the Isshinryu karate system, I would have looked at you like you were a crazy person. Because again, when you start, you're worried about like maybe making green belt, right? So again, it's just an indication that I'm getting older and I've been doing this a really long time, right? But no one should be using those titles verbally, because then the problem is you go to Japan, you use it, and then they just kind of snicker, right? And in Japan, the titles and the they like their grades and their certificates, and don't think they don't. They like it. Okay, I mean they issue certificates for hairdressers over there. So, give you an idea. I was training at the Budokan, the Okinawan Budokan with Yogi Sensei in Mariyoshi Kobudo, and we had finished, and we were getting ready to leave. I think we were going to go to lunch, right? and I was walking off with my students to go train, to go change in the changing room, in the locker room. And Yogi Sensei grabs me. He says, no, Calandra Sensei, no. And he points across the floor. And he says, Shihan. He said, you're basically telling me, no, we change in there. And, Yogi Sensei speaks a little English. So I said to him, joking around, I said, it's going to be different, me changing in there, than just changing in the locker room. So they're very formal in the way they do things, and that's fine. But for myself, I try to be careful about that stuff. If I feel my ego coming out, I try to take a step back, right? I tell the story, I don't remember what grade it was. It was either 7th or 8th Dan. I got promoted, and it was, I'd gone to the stop at the dojo. My daughter had been born the day before. And I go to the dojo, and there's mail there, and there's a letter from Master Shimabuku, and I open it, and I was being informed that I was being promoted to 7th or 8th Dan. I don't remember. And I remember taking the letter and just throwing it in the drawer. And then, I went to the hospital and, to see my wife and see my newborn daughter. And I didn't even mention it. And I don't even remember at some point I mentioned it. And my wife goes, what are you talking about? What do you mean you got promoted? And, I came to realize that getting promoted is great, but it's not the most important thing in the world. I'd much rather have someone say to me, wow, Calandra Sensei, your ability is very high. Wow, Calandra Sensei, we love the way you teach this subject. We can really understand it and grasp it. So on the subject of titles, Japanese martial arts, Sensei is basically the go-to. That's the one you want to actually use, Sensei. If you really want to separate, if the headmaster of the dojo, well, then you can call him Kancho. All right? Those are basically the two verbal titles. I've never heard, like I said, someone called Shihan. I've never heard, I've heard someone referred to as a Shihan. I've heard someone referred to as a Kaicho, as the Soke. But you don't call that person that. In the connotation of training within the dojo, it's Sensei or it's Kancho. It's important to understand this. You won't look foolish if you go to Japan and you understand this. We should adopt the same model here. The only reason people start using, having people call them Renshi, Kyoshi, and Hanshi is because of ego. So take a hard look at yourself. Okay, say, all right, why do I feel the need to be called these things that senior masters in Japan and Okinawa aren't called? They're just called Sensei. So I go to Okinawa around 1990 for the first time to train with Shimabuku Sensei. We train in the dojo, so literally I'm beside myself. I'm in the dojo. I'm seeing, the original Megami on the wall. I'm training on the same floor that Tatsuo Sensei and all these famous sensei walked on, right? And it was phenomenal. And then we went out to dinner, and I was asking him all these questions, and we sat there for a few hours. And at one time, I said to Master Shimabuku, I said, Sensei, what should I call you? And he looked at me like this. And he said, what do you mean? Because he speaks English. I said, well, do I call you Sensei? Do I call you Shihan? Do I call you this? He says, no, Sensei. He says, you call me Sensei. He says, I am Sensei. You are Sensei too. And he points to himself and says, I am 10th Dan. You are Nidan, and we both need to practice. And he said, so just Sensei, nothing else. And he also said to me that the dojo goes as the sensei goes. Meaning, and I'll use it in this connotation, if the sensei has a big ego and struts around the dojo, right, and demands that you call him certain things, well, then your student's going to become like that. And if it's a more relaxed atmosphere and the students are just referring to you as sensei, right, which to me is a very, very high form of respect. I mean, so I think the dojo goes better. So we don't need to misuse titles. It's an ego thing, and we want to stop it. And if you're not sure about the titles, well, look into it yourself. But I'm hoping this will explain it a little clearer and make people understand it a little better. It's not, well, now I got a Renshi certificate. Now I'm going to be called Renshi. I'm going to separate myself and not be called sensei anymore. I'm going to be Renshi. Oh, now I'm going to be Kiyoshi. No, it's always sensei. If sensei is good enough for the headmaster of Isshin-ryu Karate, right, and it's been good enough for many, 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 Gakiya sensei, my teacher in Mariyoshi Kobudo, Yogi Yosei sensei, another one of my teachers in Mariyoshi Kobudo. I mean, it was always just sensei, all right? And, and again, I put weight on that word. It's an important word. It's an important feeling when I refer to someone as that. I'm trying to actually make them feel how much I appreciate what they're teaching me. So, hope you enjoyed this one. Okay? Think about becoming a member. There's going to be a lot of good stuff coming down the pike. I'm adding videos every week on all the different arts I do. I'm moving some videos from the free side into the membership side. Again, the podcast, it'll be commercial free on the member side. All right. All the videos in the membership section are all commercial free. There are no commercials on the membership videos. Okay. So think about it and do me a favor, click the like. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. All right. And share. It helps me a lot. The YouTube algorithm's a funny thing. The more you do that, the more likes we get. They make the videos pop up more. All right. So appreciate it. And I look forward to the next time. Thanks. Bye.